Okay. So actually, I really want to thank all of you for all of your support. Now, since we don't have any formalities. No, it was really precious for me to be here in terms of like all these ideas, production, and the beautiful people that I have met so far. So I'm really thankful to all of you, to Belles Artes, to Jam, and of course to Diana as well, to invite me. So before I start to show some of the works that I have been creating over there in Bataan, I would like to show some works from my previous work that are kind of so that you can understand more or less the relationship between the idea of the visible and the invisible that I often use it in my works. Water is a kind of repeating aspect in my work, not physically most of the time, but it's mostly about this idea of fluid architecture, fluidity of space and memory, disappearance. So you always see a certain flow aesthetically also within the works. So the materials change in terms of every project, but more or less they have the same methodology. For instance, this one was 2013. It was in Istanbul in an art center called Pist. And this was, they invited me to make a site-specific intervention. And the very first time when I visited the site, the first thing I asked what the space was before. This is something that I do often in all of my projects almost. Even if it's a white cube gallery, the first thing I do is to kind of ask what this space was before. And this neighborhood where this space was the neighborhood where I was born. So there was a Turkish bath nearby this gallery, and then they transformed it into a 5-star hotel in late 90s. So I was trying to remember how the Turkish bath was looking like, and then I made an interview with the local people around. So also a lot of works of mine have this background of research and like speaking and interviewing people. So this is actually came out after talking to 20 people who were describing the space in 20 different ways, as if we are talking about 20 different spaces. So these are actually soap cubes. There are around 3,000 pieces inside. And you see that there is this pattern. This pattern is very specific. In Istanbul we have this pavement stone. Maybe even here you have the same wave-like form. So there is a ground that is a kind of an unwalkable ground because it's made out of soap, but because of the dominance. Oops. Why doesn't it go further? So because of the dominance of the soap, there were also the aspect of the smell, and it was so much that it started to go out of the space, and the whole street was smelling like soap. So the people who were living in the neighborhood, they started to say that when the Turkish bath was there, the street was smelling like soap at that time. So you see how senses kind of affect our memory also. When something disappears, we still have a sense of it in our mind, but we recreate a new space because we never remember it fully. So you see that there are some bumps, there are some, it's like a kind of an archaeological site effect it has. The word in situ also means on site as well, in archaeology and in arts too. This was one of the corners in the same show that was, these are actually used for window shutters. These are brass figurines. When the head goes down, you can close the shutter. When the head goes up, it prevents the wind to kind of blow it off. So I call them remembering and forgetting. Their heads are clashing. So that's the moment when you recreate something. When you forget something, it disappears, but when you try to remember it, you add new information, and then you recreate a new thing out of that. So these series of works that I will show, there are architectural elements that I've been using in this show. In a lot of works of mine, of course, there is a lot of reference with architecture. There are some architectural details that kind of intrigues me to go to different directions. This show was titled The Land Across the Blind, and it was about the matter of sight, which I also worked a lot with the project over here in Bataan with the Capis. So there is this matter of, so in the previous work we were speaking about the smell, how it affects the memory, and here we speak about the sight and the memory. So here we see a piece of a balcony that was kind of actually referenced of a balcony of a lady, a Greek lady, who was forced to leave the country during the huge exiles in Turkey. So I maximized the size of her balcony, like 5 times bigger, because so when she was forced to leave the country, she was a child, and the last vision she saw was the moment she was looking from the balcony as a child. So now we kind of come back to this balcony, and when we enter inside, we become the child, because the balcony is really huge and you have to put your arms up there, and it's kind of sunken in the depths. So it's like kind of, you know, the balcony is a kind of an architectural form where you see things, physicality of the street and everything. It's a kind of a public space and a private space, but also it lets you to think about something, to imagine something. You gaze at somewhere else, and you start to imagine that is not there. So it means that it's a kind of an instrument that links with the mind in a way, like a travel object or something. And here, because of all those political events that kind of doesn't let her to see beyond, it has sunken in the depths in a way. So it kind of connects with a rope, that the rope is connected to an upstairs balcony. This is from the other side. And you see these blue pieces on the window. Actually, they are kind of blue film that when you are inside, the street looks like as if it's flooded, and when you are outside, the space looks flooded. So it's kind of this illusion game that was all working out over there. And I was imagining the space as the submarine, because everything that is forgotten is sunken underneath. And upstairs in the same show, this is the piece that is called The Dock. It's a kinetic sculpture that is again linked with this idea of sight and the sound again. Because the dock, when you kind of tie your boats and everything, it's still a kind of a visual element that links the other shore. Visually, not physically, but it connects the boat in a sense. And this is a kinetic sculpture that unintentionally started to have this sound, that it's kind of started to connect a lot of things for the audience. For instance, like this. So it's still just like the soap installation. It's again like a ground that is an unwalkable ground. And I'm often interested with this idea of the ground underneath our feet, because it's a layer where history is kind of buried and we forget what was there before 1 day ago almost. So it kind of shakes our sense of reality of standing, that it's an unwalkable ground and we cannot situate ourselves properly. But still we can link with something that is not existent there. I mean, the voice started to have more like a kind of a dock sound, as if you are at the seaside, and you know, it became unintentionally because of the mechanism, but it transformed into something else for me. So I emptied the whole floor. There were a couple of other words, but the sound relates with the memory itself. This piece is a site-specific piece I have done in Jerusalem. So this was actually was looking like this before, and even higher. This is a water supply made by King Hezekiah 3 centuries before Christ, actually, and he is the first king who brings the water to the city. But because they are in war with the Assyrians, the first thing he does is to kind of make a tunnel under the ground and hide the water means, so that it becomes like this until today. So to me it was kind of interesting, because none of these houses or the shops have linked to each other, nobody knows each other, and this was the biggest possible public space over there. And you see how politics kind of also, even in history, makes things invisible or kind of hide underneath somewhere. So what I did was, when you are on the top of these buildings, you see a blue line that is passing through the city, which is this blue fabric that passes by the bazaar places, which looks like a kind of a river. And river is, I mean, water often divides geographies as well as connects geographies. So here what I did was just a simple gesture of letting it spill out back to the space and kind of make the invisible come back again. So we opened the space in that sense again for the audience. And these were some studies before the project I have been making. So a lot of projects of mine also has this background of the research, as I said, like just like an archaeologist, I'm digging out like historical archival photographs, texts, images, and they kind of sometimes become the part of the work, sometimes don't. In this case, they were also shown as the collage works too. This was the piece I made at Venice Biennale at the Armenian Pavilion, and the same year they won the Golden Lion as well. So this was at an old monastery, which is actually one of the biggest printing centers in Europe. And this was, the founder was coming from Turkey, that I coincidentally found out, but this was the kind of an utopic island which was very much focused on collecting information and knowledge about life. So they had 600,000 books, 200,000 manuscripts, and a lot of other artifacts on the site. And a lot of artists and writers have been coming here as a residency, and there was also a printing house. So this was the room of Lord Byron, actually, because Lord Byron, when he was young, he visited this island and found out about these Armenian monks, and he was just interested with the language, and he started to learn the language. So the books that you see around here, he has translated all of them from English to Armenian in 4 years, which is incredible. And I found his letters. At this point where the desk you see was the point where his desk was, and I imitated his desk. And I transformed it into a printing machine that was also relating with the monastery's historic printing house. And actually the letters you see are Armenian, but actually it's written in English. Letters from Lost Paradise it is written, because Byron was relating to this language that he doesn't know as the language of Lost Paradise. So for me, what was important that there's this xenophobia goes away in terms of language when you put yourself to the place of the other in that sense. And of course, a lot of reference to the written histories or unwritten histories around us. So I was kind of trying to activate as if he's writing letters over there. So it was constantly coming up and down as if somebody is writing a letter over there. Again, the sound was not intentional. I mean, it's all because of the mechanism that is working makes this sound. But it becomes a part of the room, because like there was this Egyptian mummy in the room, so it was kind of spooky a little bit with this sound and the whole setting. So yeah. Coming back to again this aquatic architecture or flowing architectural examples, this was again a show that was in a very old brewery in Turkey, and this is actually architecturally was important because this is the first beer factory in Istanbul, and which was very much related with this idea of modernity. And now, because we have a very conservative government, now everything is becoming, everything is going backwards in that sense. So imagine in early 1800 we had this space that was kind of meant to be brought to have modernity and more public space, and then it was totally shut down by the government. So what I did was simply to kind of open a hole on the wall, and just let kind of the invisible spill outside in that sense. So it becomes, materially you see the concreteness of the brick itself, but suddenly it becomes like an organism that is soft and kind of spilling outside about this hidden aspect behind the walls in a way. So in many of my works, there's this aspect of the hidden and kind of opening a small, like a kind of a comma to kind of complete an unspoken sentence. For instance, this was also from an exhibition in Amsterdam. Again, I was following the same pattern that was upstairs of the exhibition space. So I kind of made it in such a way that as if the wall is parting and then the ceiling is parting and then allowing what is upstairs, the ground of somebody else, which becomes the ceiling of another. So there are always these contradictions or kind of dualities. So it allows it to come back and remind itself in elsewhere. Again, another example of flowy architectural example. In many of these materials, you see that the choice of the material are always concrete and kind of not that fluid, but in a way I want to play with their sense of reality so that it also relates with this idea of how power is also temporary and kind of it can never continue as it's expected. So this was, for instance, a very important bank building that had these blue tiles outside the space, and I started to find out these old mosaics that were again the same color that the space had. So I was kind of relating with its history because it also disappeared because of all these migratory and political oppositions within Turkish politics. So again, it kind of melts out and its concreteness is disappeared over here. Another work, this is from my solo show at Green Art Gallery, which was actually relating a lot with this unspoken histories. So as I said, again, even though it's a white cube, I was questioning what this space was before, because the gallery is in Al Serkal Avenue in Dubai, where this gallery is also there. It used to be marble factories and workshops before. And you still have a lot of workshops that are around that has a lot of workers coming from India, Philippines, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So you see waves of people with all this labor migration that is going on over there. And these people who are not only in Dubai but everywhere that are building worlds and histories around us. And we all just know the one who commissions the building and sometimes the architect, but nobody knows about 600 or 1,000 workers and who their names or traces were. So I was kind of referencing to this unspoken history, and you see eight pieces of paperwork that have these drawings. Each piece is 10 meters, and this design was from a fountain. Okay, I don't know what to say. Sorry. Inspiration coming. Okay. In each piece, there are a lot of image references that I've been collecting from these archives, from images of art history that depicts the workers in general. Like in, for example, the one at the left-hand side was a manuscript for workers in the Byzantine period, or some Marcos mosaics that depict the Babylonian towers construction. So these are the only scenes that we see that the workers are depicted, and usually always smaller than the emperor himself. So in a way, I wanted to kind of let it spill back to the space, like a kind of like a fountain or like a waterfall that reminds itself about all this idea of production, how it works throughout history up till now.
Did you try to work with marble?
Yes, there was marble, but I guess it's for example, there are these series of icons that I have done. This is one separate piece, but there are also like singular icons that were titled icons for workers, icons for builders. And this is an icon of a marble king. These have this marble mosaic over it. So you see these two depictions of two kings. One, this is from Hagia Sophia, this grand church that we have in Istanbul, which has this depiction of two kings. One has the church inside his hand, the other is holding the city in his hand. But the funny thing is, in all these type of depictions, although they are kind of offering it to Mother Mary, the contradiction is that they are always picturized bigger than what they are representing. Like the church is small, the city is tiny in their hand, like a toy, but they're always bigger and more majestic, let's say. So what I did was, with this marble form, I kind of melt this architecture, whatever, this concrete structure inside their hand, just like their power that disappeared in time. And like all these empires, they start with a huge power show, and then it disappears after a while and leaves itself to another story. So it's always also this idea of time that changes things as well. Another piece from the same show, this was The Relic is titled, and these are the hand casts of a marble worker from Turkey. And because his hands, the fingerprints, he had these cuts and like traces of his labor on his hand, and I was very much affected by that. And there was also this story when I was also working with marble in India at that time. For example, there is a story of Taj Mahal's construction. The workers, it is said that the workers didn't have fingerprints anymore, because the emperor wanted the structure in so perfect way that they were sanding the marble like crazily in order to make this amazing masterpiece. But they lost their fingerprints because of this. So in a way, they become the victim, or they become the one that is the invisible in a way, who has built up all these spaces. So here, in the cast, I was working on this idea of traces and how we become spaces ourselves. Like when you wake up, you simply have a pillow mark on your face. So this means that we carry spaces with us in a way. Not physically maybe, but wherever we go, even in our mind, we remember spaces. So we kind of always carry the traces of places. So that's why here you see this mosaic pattern on the arm that is kind of imprinted on the skin in a way, and has become like a relic.
And that's brass?
Yeah. And again, another way that I have been working with this idea of the grid, the mosaics, and like all the other works was this collage theory that I have done about Punjab, this area that I'm still working on. This is the area that I've been photographing that has the partition in India, and this has the partition, obviously, like anywhere else, have caused a lot of displacement, and all these architectures are totally left empty because of all this displacement that were happening, and likewise on the other side of Pakistan. So, and within the city there has been a lot of also catastrophes going on. So when you go there, you see constant construction going on with marble. Everywhere is made out of marble, as if nothing has happened, and as if history is totally clean, untouched, you know. So what I have done was just to kind of let, again, like the piece in Jerusalem, allow it, the unspoken, kind of come back and flow backwards, kind of taking the time back, maybe, I don't know. So these were the collage series that I have shown in Dhaka Art Summit, actually, this year. And then this piece, so these are again particles of architecture that were carrying the history of displacement again. These are the remains of the houses of Greeks who has been displaced or exiled from the country. And I have been collecting these pieces since now. I'm still collecting, because this is from the island where I'm living in Istanbul, and you can make out the difference from the pattern and type of the material that is coming from those specific houses. So here they have become like organisms again, because they have these really strange forms that were also like they transformed through the nature, the climate, and everything as well. But what I did was to kind of add these bronze legs that kind of enable them to become mobile creatures or topographies. So that's why they recreate a kind of their own mapping or their own archipelago out of this, kind of finding again a new base to land in a way. So now I'm passing to my production during the residency. So after all these things that I've been showing, again, my huge interest starts from some details from architecture. But before coming here, I found out about Capiz, and I was quite amazed by its physicality and its grid-like form at the first place, just because also it kind of coincides with my own practice with this mosaic-like forms and all. But when you look closer, I mean, I started to make more research, and I found out about its history, because it was mostly seen in Spanish colonial architecture. And the reason that they were using Capiz was all economical reasons, because it was more cheaper and sustainable, and also sustainable than glass. For instance, also it can maintain itself better in tropic climate, as well as when a typhoon happens, it doesn't disappear just like glass, so it never breaks. And in a way, also these are some details from the photographs I have been photographing of Las Casas. Its effect is kind of interesting because there's this privacy, the sense of privacy that it adds to the space in a way, because there is no use to use curtain or any other thing, because of its opacity and how it and the light enters to the space in a way. So when I was staying in this room that was also having all these Capiz windows, I was often kind of trying to experience what it is like to be behind something that doesn't show outside, or nobody else outside sees what I'm doing inside. So it creates this sense of security, but also very uncanny because of the voices that you hear from outside, like even if it's the wave sound from the ocean, even if it's someone passing, you don't know how close they are, how far they are. So it obviously creates this division with the outside, and so there is this kind of duality between inside and outside. And this sense of invisibility was very essential in the architecture, in the colonial architecture, because they were creating these corridors around the house for the servants to use them, so that they don't be visible to the owner of the house or to the guests in a way. So these were the paths that they were walking around, which was kind of really interesting to me. That still speaks about invisible labor again as well. And also, whilst working, actually the very first time of the research in Manila, we went to the Anthropological Museum, and there was this section for the textile. And this was the binacol textile that kind of intrigued me so much that it was kind of resembling to this grid-like form. And when I learned its symbolism, which was like the whirlwind, which was used to kind of hypnotize the evil and keep the evil away, I kind of related it with the Capiz itself, like this form, and the effect that it does when you start to gaze at that. It kind of has an hypnotic effect that divides the yesterday and today, and also the use of the typhoons, for example. It's a kind of a threat. It's considered as a threat, but it's still the unknown, which I also experienced it when I was here. I mean, we came here because the typhoon was there, but also still it was this unseen threat that was outside. And I was often relating this with the sites we have been going, like a lot of political background and also the history over here, that was still speaking a lot about this idea of the visible and the invisible. And for example, the nuclear power plant, as well as the school in Balanga, for example. This one was very, very strong for me, because these are actually the classrooms of the school, but the windows, how they were placed, and they were kind of making the kids visible, but also outside. The garden of the school was the garden where the Filipino and the American forces surrendered to the Americans at that time. There are torture rooms nearby the classrooms, and this World War II museum that was really, really harsh. In a way, like there are these really two conflicts between the children over there, the ongoing life, and how close it is to history in a way. They are right in the heart of the history. So these windows, that's why kind of made me think about this switch, how much we face things, how much we forget, how much we cover whenever we don't want to face them in a way. For example, this is another spot which affected me. This was inside the nuclear power plant. This windows, that was the only windows we saw that you could gaze to the landscape that is outside. And of course the history of the whole space was also related with this idea of, and they're also their way of talking about it today was creating this closeness, like a closed shell that is not willing to open outside, and also the reason why it's made there also. So a lot of these references kind of made me link with this idea of the use of the capis itself. During the research, another thing that was interesting to me was the houses of Las Casas, how they're also brought from different contexts and kind of unfolding history in a way, just like the windows themselves. When you see some of the windows, they have one capis missing so that you can relate yourself with the outside. And here, seeing some on-site constructions kind of made me think about what it is there today, what are the remnants of yesterday, in a sense. So it's kind of unfolding history and putting it back again in different contexts. These were some images during the research. I guess these are from the workshop that we went to the capis maker who were making the lamps. These are the shapes that they're cutting for the lamps. But in a way, all these geometric forms also kind of create this, this idea of the mosaic is to make a whole picture out of smaller particles. So it's like particles of time, particles of history coming together and then unfolding again. And of course, still, again, there are also the effect of the nature that is very dominant here, because this is coming from the sea, and then they're connecting with wood, which are the trees actually, and it has a relationship with the wind also, because it can sustain itself against the wind or against the wind of politics or history. So these were actually the pieces that I was thinking to transform into kinetic sculptures. And these are the trials in the workshops that I have done from really old capis windows that were found on site, and we were cutting them into pieces, and we placed these wooden beams that were kind of more concave. They were enabling this movement to happen, because they are in the architecture itself. They are really concrete. They're meant to not move there. Even the way you open a capis window is more horizontal. So here what I wanted to do is to kind of shake their sense of reality in a way. So just like the Binacol's abstraction of the wind, I really wanted to abstract this idea of the site that doesn't allow us to see, or doesn't want us to see beyond. So I made this group of kinetic pieces that so this is the very beginning. They will become more real kinetic sculptures maybe in the future. Yes, yes. But also they are not stable. So when they are not stable, whilst one is becoming like this, the other becomes like this, so that it allows you to see that is what is beyond that. So in a way, it also plays with this idea of the horizon line, or what is beyond that it belongs to us to see, in a sense. Also, like a lot of pieces when we were collecting the very first ones, some parts you see that the capis has fallen down, so it has created this really abstract pattern, just really like the textile itself. This is the second series that I started to work with. These are still the remains of the windows actually. The top part, the flat wooden piece you see, were the pieces that were falling out from the original windows, where the wood passes. So I wanted to really abstract the window and this idea of kind of unfolding a window, just like the architecture in Las Casas. So I find them quite musical as well in their way of standing, also like the waves itself too. So I made this series of work that are kind of again melting structures like my earlier pieces. So like there are these musicality between the copies as well, which also allows certain parts to be seen rather than hiding things. And this is the last piece that came out from.
When I first saw the photo, I thought you were kind of like sails. I don't know if.
It became like that in a sense. Because you can't help it. The form itself is there are certain references to certain forms that speaks with our mind, and obviously the space it has a lot of reference and relationship with the sea. So there are waves every day. Like we were also. Oops. No. Okay.
But also because the material came from the sea too.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You're tying
It kind of comes back to wherever it comes from in a way. Yeah.
In a different form.
Yes. Yes. Okay. There was only one image left.
Can you speak about why you work with movement and kinetic in some of your sculptures?
I guess with certain materials they allow you with the language with the visual language of the installation and working with objects allows one to kind of narrate a certain story or a certain feeling. And I often like to kind of, with the kinetic sculpture, you can link a sound that you have heard with the whole narration that you want to work with, which is often like the sound comes afterwards, after the movement starts. And I really like the works to become like living organisms rather than like just stable artworks. And I also like this idea of things that shakes our reality, like the unexpected. Because most of my sculptures, the kinetic ones, they are usually they are straight, and then there are these sensors that are placed in the space. So when somebody enters the space, they take the movement and then they start to work. So it's kind of becomes the unexpected for the audience also. So the way they experience the piece, they can relate with things that's from their own reference in their mind, in a sense. And yeah, I mean, I really like this idea of living structures and more organic structures that relate with sound, mind, and a lot of things on site. Yeah. So this is the last image. And here, I mean, the light was really beautiful at that time because it was giving the shadow also. Just like even when you dive into the sea, you see the shadow of a boat, or you see the shadow of what is above us in a sense. So it's always this idea of underneath and above, or inside outside. So yeah. I also like this sense of fragility, just like the capiz itself too. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, these were the 3 body of work, as well as a lot of footage I have been taking during the research phase. Not only the capiz, but also all these historical sites that kind of had certain visual references with what I was more interested with. So I guess they will become also a work out of afterwards. So yeah.
Can you, what about your experience the first few days when you were doing a little bit of research in Manila, and you kind of encountered some books from the library, and if you walked up, did you get to go to Intramuros at all?
Intramuros, yeah, the second day.
Talk about that, because in the past, not a lot of our residents got to have that time, and so like what information did you retain from that kind of transferred to at the end what you were discovering there? Were there any unexpected like connections? That
Unexpected connections. I think the very first, more than Intramuros, I think the very first interaction was that moment that I landed to Manila and I came to the talk of Paul. And there was this film screening that was going on that was about the oral history study made with the executors during the wartime, I guess, right? Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking a lot about this idea because we always think backwards, and like we always. Like there was this, the spoken reality of a harsh reality, and it was so open, was not covered in that sense, was uncovered. So that was the very moment that kind of, I guess this was a part of the whole intrigue, the whole journey in a way. But I guess, I don't know, it's very hard to explain how the experience was because I was linking everything with each other, even the meaning of the word intramuros, the fact that it's inside walls again, like, and then you see the city that is outside, that are the slums. At the same time, you see from the other side of the river, and yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to explain this. I don't know how to say that. Okay, the trip was planned maybe, but the experiences were kind of really unexpected things and feelings. Really, like for example, the Rizal Museum also. The idea of showing history with this sheer realness was really interesting because I haven't seen that much of real depiction before in certain museums about history. So the depiction of history here was really interesting to me. Even the Second World War Museum in Balangas, no? Yeah, Balangas, and yeah, also in the memorial as well. Because in Turkey, from the geography that I come from, is very much used to cover up things and kind of let it go into the depths of the soil so that nobody speaks about it and nobody remembers it. But here there's this certain, there's this language of realness.
Frozen in time.
Yeah, frozen in time, but not in a negative way, because it keeps you alive and makes you remember of what is there today, that you can relate with what it is today in that sense. So that was interesting about this idea of realness and what is kind of hidden behind. So yeah, I mean, the very first days were all these visual things that I was relating in my mind. Like every artist have their own way of mapping things in their own mind. The library itself was like that as well. Yeah. But I think out of all, the most the one that was shaped my sense of reality was this place of the school. Yeah.
The elementary school.
Yeah. It was very strong.
Yeah, see, like frozen in time. You know?
Yeah, it's frozen in time, but it's like I don't know. There are people also revisiting the site. There was the courtyard where they had this talk with the Japanese. I mean, they have depicted it with bronze sculptures, and people are going there to visit this. But in a way, it was so real. And on the other hand, you see that the lessons are going on, and then there are children playing outside, and then there's this museum that depicts the death march in a very real way, and the way also with their sense of narrating stories, the ones who are the guides, the way they are narrating the whole story was also really interesting in that sense. So yeah, how you write histories or how you kind of direct histories in that sense was interesting. But that was, I think, visiting the school kind of made me go into this work, I feel.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, it already started way before, but I think those windows that were kind of the passage point between the outside and the inside, the past and the present, was really important to me in that sense. So that was the moment, I guess, yeah. And the nuclear power plant even, I guess, yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, that's.
Very easy to, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think-
right now it's kind of settled.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
left it there. It's
yeah.
like an exhibition.
Yeah, I think we should try to get people to see it. If you want to get schools in, or
sure.
just even the class or the staff.
Yeah, first the stuff for
Yeah,
sure.
maybe just something, like just write something about it. And
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess, so there was this curator who was in residence here 2 years ago, Aslı Seven. So she was the one that I met before coming here, and I was saying that I was interested with the kapis. And I learned that she was also interested with similar aspects, and she also knows my work. So we said, let's send letters to each other whilst I'm here. So she sent me one which was kind of really mapping my own mind, because she has been here too. So maybe out of that dialogue something might come up, like kind of like a dialogue between the past and present type of thing could be narrated like that. And then if the film becomes something, for sure I would love to connect it with, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the shelf life? Yeah.
For a long time.
these are like Spanish period.
Yeah.
So
Or what?
Yeah, especially,
they're old.
I mean, this work.
They're like old.
Yeah, these ones
Oh,
are all
the
from
windows, of course. Yeah,
from
yeah.
the houses that were
Yeah, yeah.
over there. Yeah, 1800 maybe, some of them.
So
Yeah.
that's even kind of adds weight to the sculpture too, because they carry this history.
Yeah,
for
yeah,
centuries.
yeah. But just like this idea of, Las Casas unfolding buildings and bringing it to another context. So that's why here also the windows become something else in that sense too. Yeah.
So you're still thinking of a title.
Yeah. I really want to. I mean, I often in my works I kind of reference to a poem or from a text that I see. So I really want to give some time to it, because I really feel that there is some special connection. Like, so for now I just say in my mind like studies of Capis shells, like simple one for now. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Hera.
you.